All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar on teamwork, the board chair and CEO relationship. This is the last webinar in our series on board development this January. So a little bit about us. Here at Grow and Lead, we grow the capacity of individuals and nonprofit organizations to lead progress in UP communities. We do this through trainings like tonight's webinar. We also have a membership program for nonprofits that includes discounted member rates for workshops and training services, free webinars like tonight's, special registration rates for the UP Nonprofit Conference, and up to 4 hours of consulting and brainstorming with our staff. Now I'd like to introduce you to this evening's presenter, Amy Quinn. Amy is the CEO here at Grow and Lead. Welcome, Amy.
I guess it helps if I take the mute off. Thank you. Sorry, everyone. I was talking away. Luckily, Victoria's here to let me know I had been muted. So back to the agenda. We're going to talk about the role of the board and the role of the CEO briefly, just because we want to get into how each role has a different viewpoint, because that plays into the chair and the CEO partnership. And we're going to talk about within the boardroom conflicts that may happen and tips for having positive relationships. I want you to keep in mind that the context for this webinar is thinking about a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization that has at least one paid employee. Now, if you don't fall into that bucket, that's fine. This will still apply to you. Just some of the things I say may not completely apply, or you may say, well, what if, we don't have a paid staff or whatnot. So getting to the paid staff, if you do have a paid staff, assuming you do, when I say CEO, what I mean is the same as executive director. It's your top decision maker, your chief paid employee. And then when I'm mentioning chair, those two terms will be used a lot in this webinar. And the chair is the board chair or the board president or whoever is the chief of the overall organization. Not paid staff. Tonight we're going to focus more on roles and relationships than we are as far as the actual chair duties. We're not going to go through a lot of the specific chair duties or managing a meeting or that type of thing. If you're interested in that, let us know. And one way you can communicate with us is through the chat box, and Victoria will be monitoring it. But if you would like us to do a webinar just for chairs, we can do that, no problem. So if you have a question at any time, please put it in the chat box, thought, comment, whatever, put it in the chat box. Victoria will read those to us as we have time. And don't worry, she won't use your full name if you have it in the system. So you feel free to ask questions and know that it will still be confidential. So when you think about chairs and CEOs, again, the chair and the CEO are two terms that are going to be used extensively in this webinar. So when I say chair, I want you to visualize right now who is your board president or one of the board presidents or chairpersons that you work with or that you serve with. So get that in your mind. This is the chair. And when I say chair, I want you to think about that person in that role. And now think about the staff at the nonprofit that you're either working at or serving with, that you're associated with. Think of the top decision maker as far as staff would be concerned, paid staff. So either the chief executive officer, CEO, or executive director. Some are even called project director or program directors, although they are technically the CEO. I also know of some that are called chief operating officers, even though they serve as a chief executive officer. So when I say chair, think about the first person think about the person on the board with the highest level of authority. And when I say CEO, think about the level within the organization below the board, highest level of authority. So with a board looks at a high viewpoint, like the 20,000-foot viewpoint, and over a long period of time. One of the key questions, or one of the key words for a board member is what? And here are some example questions that board members may want to ask and have asked or should ask. What are the goals for the organization? Because the board's responsible for the strategic direction and making sure we align with the mission. To what extent does this align with our mission? What is or should be our policy to make sure that we're governing and have documented policies in place? Really, how can we ensure the organization is well run? Because as a board, the board is responsible for the organization. They're responsible to the shareholders, to the stakeholders, the people that help contribute, and the customers of the organization. And so some of the tools a board might use are strategic plans, policy manuals, stakeholder input, which could be your clients or customers, it could be donors, it could be your funders, all of the above. And then also to remember to abide by your articles of incorporation and your bylaws. On the flip side, a CEO lens, one of the key words for CEO is how. Because the board sets the direction, the CEO implements it. And so how are we going to accomplish what the board has directed? How are we going to meet our goals? When, what's the timeline? Where and by whom, if you have other staff or volunteers. And so some tools that a CEO may use are yearly action plans or yearly calendar that ties into the longer term strategic plan. Procedural or operational organization guidelines and regulations, organizational designs and staffing, and that could be your org chart or any reports or funding requirements that you may have due to grants. So the CEO is really in the day-to-day operations of the organization, and the board is in the high-level view. If you've attended any of our Board 101 presentations, you've most likely seen this slide. So I won't go over it in detail, but I want you to have it as a resource in case you haven't seen it before, because it summarizes and provides a big laundry list of looking at the various lenses. On the left side is your board and the way that they look at different things, what they focus on, the types of questions that they ask, what tools they use, and you want to look at those things if you're a board member. On the right side is for the CEO. And so the CEO, as you can tell, it's much more granular, more detailed, more in the implementation phase. And at the bottom, underlying it all, is trust. And I want to share this because depending on what role you're in, you need to be mindful of, in this context, in this situation, am I a board member or am I a staff person or a volunteer of a nonprofit? Because many of us wear many different hats. And so I think the key in this slide is stay on your side. You know, the Super Bowl is coming up, so we don't want any offsides. So boards, you stay functioning in the left, CEOs in the right, and then we'll come together and it will be like magic. So this is an old cliche, 1 + 1 = 3, but it's really what I wanted to use to represent the synergy, which is also a cliche, but a buzzword, synergy, created from a professional partnership. So the chair and the CEO really really are, they're the face of the organization. They really drive the success, or not so effectiveness of the organization. And it takes two. It takes both of them together, and both of the leaders need to be intentionally engaged as partners. They need to see each other as partners, and that they're working toward a shared purpose, that they're working together, and that their effectiveness is interdependent of each other. So they want to work closely together. It reminds me a lot of, two people in a successful marriage. You're separate individuals, but you're equal, and you're stronger together. And like a marriage, you must work at it, because sometimes you don't get along, you have disagreements, you may not like each other at some points in time, or you don't like what the other person does. But think about any relationship that brings a lot of value to your life. If you reflect back, you remember it takes work. And so how can we help our chairs and CEOs, or how can we as chairs and CEOs work to try to make the 1 + 1 = 3? And so I created a little diagram here under trust, because like I said, trust is really the foundation for all of this, and trust and the maintaining your relationship. But trust the T stands for time, spending time together. R is relationship of the two people, the chair and the CEO, understanding each other and seeking to understand, supporting one another, and functioning as a team. So let's break that down a little bit. It's encouraged that you meet with your board chair, or the board chair and CEOs meet at least one time in between board meetings, and talk about how the meeting is gone, what you want for the agenda, because the chair and the CEO create the agenda together. I'll get into that in a little more, but you want to make sure that you're available to each other. You want to have meaningful dialogue and ongoing communication, and having some time even outside of work function. But just, I know with my chair, I tend to go to lunch with her. Actually, my chair and my past chair as part of a succession and training plan. But it's nice because lunch is a little less formal, and it doesn't feel like we always have to be down to business. And then here I added, under the meaningful dialogue, some questions that you may want to ask each other as a way to start developing the relationship and getting to know, as a way to build trust between the two of you. And then when I say exercise grace, that could also be your patience. You want to be a mentor and a coach and a partner to each other, and you want to be a mentee and a team player. You want to be coachable and a partner. So you're playing both roles simultaneously, and it's a fluid changing back and forth of sometimes you're the mentor, sometimes you're the mentee. And it's really that relationship give and take, which also means you need to lower your ego and be willing to have those difficult conversations. So, and you know what? Sometimes things just take time. How many times do you hear a couple that's been married for 50 years say, I love him more than I did the day we were married? And so I'm not saying that these relationships last 50 years, because I am in favor of term limits. But again, think of if you want to have a really functioning relationship, then you're going to have to work on it. And that takes time. And as far as the relationship, you want to make sure you're accountable to each other. And preferably, you respect each other. But if you're in a situation where you don't feel like you can respect your partner, so if you are a CEO and you feel like you cannot respect your chair, then you must at least respect the office. So be respectful and courteous to the office, and work to set aside your differences for the greater good. This also includes those setting boundaries, because sometimes, and in the UP, we tend to have smaller towns and people know each other. And so it would be easy to cross boundaries between personal and professional in a way that could be damaging. So keep that in mind as far as this is a professional working partnership. And of course, you want to be able to collaborate together. And part of that is presuming positive intentions. That's going to come up quite a bit tonight, but presume positive intention about the other person. And really, really one of the key things, I can't say it enough, is communication. It's ongoing communication, both the good and the bad. And the more time you spend with each other, the more you build your relationship, the more open communication you can have. And then that will help you understand each other better. You want to understand each other's roles and respect their roles, and that's part of the boundaries as well. Respect where their role starts and finish, and have a dialogue on where do we draw the line. Like, you know, some of the time it can be a gray area between should a board chair be doing this or a CEO be doing this. And so having an open, honest dialogue and just say, who should, do you want to do this or should I? What do you think? That can help you with relationship building and building trust versus the making assumptions and jumping to conclusions, and that causes chaos. And so a key too is also discuss expectations. What matters most to each of you? And what do you expect of me? Ask that of each other. Work on developing a shared vision, even if it's for, Mr. or Mrs. Board Chair, for your time in office, what would you like our shared vision to be? So even if it's just 1 year, it's like, why are they being willing to serve? If you're a CEO, talk to your board chair about why are you willing to put in the extra effort and to be the chair, because there's a lot more responsibility that goes with being a chair versus a board member. And so what do they want to have as legacy? Seems like a grand word, but in essence, what do they want for their legacy as part of their leadership as the chair of your organization? Now, the key is that you develop a shared vision, because you also always want to make sure that you're calibrating with each other, that your vision doesn't become self-serving of one leader or the other, but that it's together for the greater good of the organization. So you have to keep that in mind as well, that you want a shared vision between the both of you for the betterment of the organization. And then also just be aware and be willing, here again, to discuss things as necessary at a professional level, that, personal things, personal lives may affect professional, whether it's personality conflicts or disagreements directly between the two leaders, the chair and the CEO, or if it's something that is happening in one of their personal lives that the other leader has, no control over, but it's still, no one is completely compartmentalized. We all tend to have, our personal life will affect our professional life, whether it's not having as much time or concentration or needing to be out of town. It depends on whatever the personal matters are. But that kind of goes back also to what I said of exercise grace, because really just naming it and saying, okay, this is what's happening, then that can help build trust and continue to move the relationship and the partnership forward. For example, last year, we were getting ready for a major board meeting. It was right before a strategic planning retreat, and my husband had an accident and needed emergency surgery the day of our board meeting. And I am very grateful that I had a chair, and he was well equipped, he was prepared, and he said, you know what, it would be great to have you there because this is such an important board meeting and we're having such strategic discussions, but you need to be with your husband. And so I was able to be there at the hospital with him and not be concerned about what was going on with the board or the organization, because I knew it was in good hands with my board chair and the rest of my team. And part of that is because we had mutual support, mutual respect of each other, and mutual support. And support doesn't mean sheltering or covering. It doesn't mean that the board chair needs to go to bat for the CEO and ensure that the other board members don't gang up on the CEO or don't make their life miserable. You know, a cover implies protection, and an executive director, a CEO, they don't need protection, but they should have support. And so the chair, you don't want to get into a situation where you're quote unquote taking sides, or there's a disagreement between another board member and the CEO, and so you feel like you're stuck in the middle. Really cut that as soon as you can, get everyone that's involved in the room and settle it in that manner. So, but have mutual support. And here again, support can be one of those words that is a gray word that's like, well, does that mean they want me to print the agendas for them, or just sit by them next to in a meeting in case they have questions? So that goes back to the question of that we talked about earlier of what do you expect of me, and where do we draw the lines, and kind of like, how can I lend support to you as a CEO? How can I lend support to you as a chair during the meeting, or how can I help you be equipped for the meeting? And then definitely you want to maintain confidentiality. Chairs, I'm talking to the board chairs out there, chairs, your CEOs need to know that they can trust you, and that they can trust you to have these conversations, to be a partner with you, and that you'll maintain confidentiality. You know, it's a real delicate balance for a CEO because there is this inherent inequity of power. You know, as a board chair, you are the chief decision maker of a unit that hires and fires the CEO. So there's this inherent balance of power that you need to try to balance as much as possible. It's a tightrope for a CEO because as a CEO, they want to make sure that they are competent and that the board trusts them and the board recognizes that they're competent. But yet, as a CEO, we also want to leverage our board as thought partners and leverage your talents and skills. And so it's a tightrope and a balancing act between boards and CEO, and especially the chair and the CEO, to be able to discuss issues and brainstorm and talk about things, and allow the CEO to allow the board chair to be the chief organizational officer, really, and be that strategic thought partner, but still trust that the board chair isn't going to go back to the board and say, well, you know what, she asked me this question and I just think it's crazy that she didn't know the answer to that, and so I don't trust her, blah, blah, blah. That's not professional at all. That undermines the trust and goes against what you're trying to do with your relationship. So maintain the confidentiality. And I'm not saying don't address things that need to be addressed. I hope you don't hear that. But it's, you know, here again, it's helping to develop that trust. And you want to encourage each other. You don't know how many times I've had CEOs say, we had our best fundraising event ever, and only one of our 11 board members commented on it. And only one board, or they may say only one board member came and said congratulations to the staff for having for receiving a grant because of their prior experience with this funder, and the funder was so happy with their the service that the organization provides. So as a board, and especially the board chair, similar to what we talked about with ambassadorship, you want to make sure that you're in tune with what's happening at a high level with the organization and be able to say to the CEO, kudos for this, or you know what, I know that this happened and it can be very discouraging. It's okay, we'll work through plan B, you know, and have that confidence in yourself and your partner to be able to work through that together. And that also goes back to, again, I could probably say this on every slide, presume positive intentions. And that really goes to communication as well. And then exercise authority as appropriate. So sometimes as a board chair, you do have to exercise authority. Sometimes things go off the rails. You want to make sure your CEO is accountable and is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Otherwise, you as a board member and as a chair are not doing your legal duties in oversight of the organization. But it can also be something as simple as signing a contract because your policy on spending limits is exceeded, and so you as the board chair must sign it in addition to the CEO. So exercising authority as appropriate and when needed. And again, you really want to balance that, and I talked about that a lot on the confidentiality, so I'm not going to continue to really dwell on it, but just for those of you that are board members and don't work in the nonprofit world, be aware that it takes courage, it takes strength for a CEO to be vulnerable in letting you in, so to speak, and saying, here's what I'm struggling with, what do you think? And really it takes a strong leader to partner with you and truly be a partner with you, because it's so much easier if the CEO would just let the board do whatever they want to do and move forward, or on the opposite end of the pendulum, if the CEO just ran everything and had the board be a rubber stamp, yes, that sounds good, yes, that sounds good. And neither of those ends of the pendulum are long-term effective for an organization. Also, the last T for trust is looking at a team, and you build trust, and part of that is by working as a team. And this goes somewhat back to confidentiality, some to presuming positive intentions. I lost my words there for a minute. Some of it is the trust and developing that relationship. You want to speak with one voice outside of the boardroom. Inside the boardroom is where you want to have discussion. You want to have disagreements. You want to have very healthy discussions. But once you step outside of the boardroom, whatever was decided, whatever was discussed, you're both on the same page. That you are partners together. You're saying the same thing, and you're in agreement with what you're going to say, and you have a unified voice outside of the boardroom. And again, the balance of power, that dynamic plays into this being a team together as strategic leaders, as partner leaders for the organization. And you will need to be able to address sensitive issues together, which I've already kind of talked about that with some of the questions and whatnot. Another tip to help you do this is to practice mindfulness. And both leaders need to be very attuned to the being mindful and thinking through what the other person, how they're being perceived, think through what they're communicating and how they can support the other person. Like I said, a board chair really is a strategic thought partner, and the executive director, us CEOs, we need to allow the board chair to play this role. And so being mindful of your role versus their role and the bigger picture of things and how you're coming across, and also being mindful of what's best for the greater good for this organization, that helps you build that partnership and strengthen your leadership skills to catapult the organization. And as you do that, you want to be sure and acknowledge each other's contributions and give credit where credit is due. So some of the ways a board, and this is a whole board, not just the chair, but ways a board can have a good working relationship with the CEO is, first and foremost, know your duties and your roles and your responsibilities and fulfill them. So know your job and fulfill it. And if you're not sure what it is, we have a lot of resources at Grow and Lead to help you better understand your role as a board member. And then come to meetings prepared so that you're ready to have discussion and you're ready to make decisions that can move the organization forward. Get to know your CEO. I had a board member in Colorado that every once in a while, he knew I really liked coffee. So every once in a while he would drop by with a cup of coffee from my favorite coffee place. And I just thought that was so amazing. I mean, here 10 years later, I still remember that. It was incredible. This know the 3 hats of governance, that's also in our Board 101, but it's really looking at knowing and remembering what the context is that you're interacting with each other, and the board member, the context that you're interacting with the CEO. Are you interacting with the CEO as a volunteer or as a unified board unit? Or as an implementer that you've been delegated power for a specific project. Be willing to admit that you don't know. I mean, remember that your CEO is in the day-to-day. They're in the daily grind every day. And so as CEOs, we sometimes forget what board members know or don't know, or we forget that, oh, they weren't involved in all these daily conversations because that's not what they're supposed to be involved in. And so sometimes you need to give them context. But a lot of times we as staff, we're like, well, we don't know what to tell you because we aren't sure where you are in your learning process. A great example of this is financial statements. Like, do you really understand the financial statements? And if you don't, please ask. Even if you think you do, but something looks amiss, or you could even say something like, how do you see the organization performing, or what has been the trend from the past couple of years to this year, or why are things higher or lower, or whatever the case may be. Just asking questions, it shows you're engaged and being willing to admit what you don't know. And we talked about being an ambassador and bring forward ideas along with complaints, because a CEO can't improve if they don't know how or what areas they need to improve. But if you constantly come to them with complaints, it can get weary. Another key is to not make promises outside of the board. As a board member, as an individual member, you can't speak on behalf of the board unless the board has given you the delegation to do so. So be careful about that. When you're serving as a volunteer and it's just you and the CEO, you can't make promises of, oh yeah, we're going to go and launch this new program. We're going to make sure it happens. It's like, well, unless the board has voted on it, that's a promise that you really shouldn't make. promises that you can make are, yes, I will contact this donor and talk to them about our new program, or yes, I'll invite you to have lunch with myself and a prospective donor so that you can talk about our organization. Those kind of promises, obviously, that are within your individual control, you can make. And this is a big one. Communicate disagreements in private. And no gossip. And I heard, and I can't remember now the organization, but they said one of their core values or their cultural norm is no gossip. And so I was thinking, well, how do they define gossip? And the way they defined it was, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically was, you don't talk to another person about a situation that that person can't directly influence, impact, or have control over or a decision on. And so that helps prevent talking behind people's backs and that type of thing. And I thought, I really like that definition, that it's you are having constructive discussion with people that actually can make the change versus just venting and causing chaos. This also really includes be particularly careful with email and having long strings of email back and forth. If you have a disagreement, as I mentioned before, I'm the type of, let's just all get together and figure this out. You know, that's kind of that's my own personality, but I realize not everyone is like that. So here it also goes back to mindfulness. Be mindful of what you are saying or what you're writing in the email, and is it helpful, or are you fueling the fire? Be realistic in the goals and what you expect of the CEO, and respect and trust your CEO. If you do not respect or trust your CEO, that is a big red flag to me. Either you need to work more on the relationship building and get to know each other better, or you need to try to figure out why you don't respect or trust your CEO. And you also need to find out, is it just you, or do other people feel the same way? Are you hearing common complaints, for lack of a better word, that would give you reason to doubt your CEO? In that case, you need to start thinking about performance evaluation and performance measures and correcting performance. But unless the CEO has given you reason to really doubt, again, presume positive intentions. You're probably going to get sick of hearing that by the end of the night, but it's such a great thing to remember. It's really encouraging to a CEO also when board members are able to devote the time that's needed. And I know everyone's busy, but it's so encouraging when I have board members that come to a meeting, they're prepared, they're able to stay and engage in the meeting and make good decisions and talk about things. And it's just, I always leave feeling like, wow, I have really dedicated volunteers that are driving this organization forward, and I'm just lucky to be part of it. And along with the presuming positive intentions is, you know, don't jump to conclusions, which also really ties into the communicate disagreements in private so that you can sort out what were conclusions and assumptions versus what really happened. And then that also ties in with no surprises. No one likes, other than possibly a surprise party, no one likes surprises. So no last minute agenda items that are a major issue or things like that. It's best to communicate often, the good and the bad. In ways that CEOs can have good working relationships with the board. So now CEOs, I'm talking to you. Here again, communicate often, have effective communication. Find out what things are you communicating that resonate with your board? Are you communicating in a timely manner? Are you communicating too much or not enough? Are you communicating the things that help them do their job? Are you helping to equip them as ambassadors? And you as a CEO know and fulfill your job as well. And then the full disclosure also ties in with the no surprises, is that just be very transparent, because you are partnering together to try to move the organization forward. You're all in the same boat. CEOs, take time to get to know your board members. And I have to admit, this isn't something I do as much as I would like, but I really encourage you get to know them outside of a board meeting context. And then be willing to admit when you don't know something, follow up with answers. And then I love this, scrap the ownership complex. And especially if you as a CEO or a founder, this can be really difficult, and it really impacts the organization's sustainability and future succession planning, and it can be it can undermine the board authority. So just, you know, get over it. Let your board be the board and do the work that they need to do. And then similar to, you want the board chair and the board members to maintain confidentiality, you should as well. And give credit when things go well. Some of these are the same. I want to make sure that the CEOs look at the bullet point that says leverage board members' talents. You have an amazing set of skills and talents and knowledge and experience sitting around the table when you have a board meeting. So you want to make sure and leverage those either within the meeting or talking to them outside of the meeting. Provide training opportunities for them. Maybe it's about what's going on in your specific industry or what's the latest board training. Maybe you have them either see the slides or attend one of these webinars or download it off of the website. Or if you're a member, you can have us as Grow and Lead come and do a little workshop for you, like if you want just a 1 hour, whatever workshop, or even half hour. And again, CEOs, don't surprise your boards, not unless it's a really great surprise. Okay, as far as being in the boardroom and with CEOs and the chair and the interaction and helping to develop that dual leader partnership. Chair, it's always good if you arrive early and meet with the CEO and know your agenda. Keep in mind, this is your meeting. As chair, you are responsible for ensuring that the board is doing what the board should be doing to oversee the organization and help move it forward in its mission. So own the meeting, own the agenda, even though you most likely, and you should, set it in correlation with the CEO. It's your meeting. Please start and end on time. And that's a personal pet peeve. I guess self-explanatory. Board chair, you set the tone of the meeting. And so if you you can either be very formal and rigid, or you can be very informal and relaxed. And it really depends on, some of it is your personality, your style, some of it is the organization's culture, but be very mindful that you as the board chair, you set the tone for the meetings, which then sets the tone for all the other board members. And as they interact with staff, it kind of drizzles down into the rest of the organization. And so you want to make sure you set a tone that will produce effective meetings. And notice I didn't say it had to be formal and fast, but you want effective and productive meetings. So with that, you want to encourage broad participation. You want to look around as you're facilitating the meeting and make sure everyone is participating or talking or has a chance to talk. And it's always nice to end board meetings on a positive note and recap future action items. During the board meetings, now I'm talking to CEOs. As CEOs, you want to ensure the board has what they need to conduct business, and you want to make sure they have it well in advance of the meeting. So when you meet with the board chair a few weeks before your board meeting, and you say, okay, what do we need to accomplish at this board meeting? Okay, so then these are the items, based on that, these are the items we need on the agenda. Based on these items that we need on the agenda, then we need X, Y, and Z documents to help provide the context for the board to be able to make the decisions that the board needs to do and conduct their business. So a lot of prep work should go into board meetings before the board meetings, and help work, CEOs work with your chairs to make sure that the board has what they need for their meetings. And sit together with and support the chair. And again, support can be defined however the two of you as leader partners define it, but it does help to sit together, because if you need to pass a note back and forth, or if someone has a question, you're there and you're showing physical support in addition to verbal support in the meeting. Make sure the chair runs the meeting, which this seems very obvious, but it doesn't always happen. And a lot of times, even if the chair will call the meeting to order, I have seen where CEOs from the chair calls the meeting to order, and then the CEO just takes over from there. And so really the CEO should speak probably the least out of anyone, since it is a board meeting. Obviously, the CEO, you need to be prepared to explain issues or to answer questions if asked, because again, you're there to equip and support the board in moving the organization forward. And again, remember, I can't stress this enough, it's the board's meeting, which means the board needs to be doing their work, which means some of the time as CEOs, we need to get out of the way. Now, outside of the boardroom, this is where chair and CEO as leader partners can really come together and work on the relationship as well as the organizational goals. You can come together and you can debrief a recent meeting, conduct personal assessments, and then talk to each other. I listed some questions here about some things you may want to talk about. Did we fulfill our respective roles within the meeting? Did the meeting point us further towards the mission? And then ask each other, what might I have done differently? And even ask yourself, what might I have done differently? And then what are our next steps? So you kind of keep the momentum from the meeting going as a team together. And you don't and then create the next board meeting agenda. But I wouldn't say you need to do that all in one fell swoop meeting. Just, I wanted to make sure that I had a place to be able to say the board chair drives the meetings, drives the agendas, but the CEO has input, and it truly should be a partnership in creating the board meeting agenda. Keep in mind, as board chairs and as CEOs, you really are the face of the organization. People watch you, and just like I said, the board chair sets the tone for meetings. Your relationship and how you work together is also observed, and either consciously or subconsciously, people pick up on clues based on that relationship. And what you say matters, but what you do matters more. You want to make sure that you're being a good communicator and that it's something that you've learned and you've practiced, the mindfulness like we've been talking about tonight. And make sure that you follow through and do what you say you're going to do. And work as a team. And like I mentioned, having that unified voice together to demonstrate your competency as partner leaders of the organization. So what if, instead of on the left having a unified board meeting, what if your chairs look more like on the right, where it's kind of like chaos, or at least you're not even willing to face each other? Conflicts are inevitable because we're people, we are not perfect, and we're passionate about what we do. But conflict can also be beneficial. Think of it as a difference of opinion or a disagreement. In fact, I even debated using the word conflict because sometimes that can have so many different connotations to it. But basically, this context, we're talking about when something goes off the rails. It could be a misunderstanding, in communication, it could be someone actually blatantly did something wrong, or whether they knew it or they didn't know it was wrong. It could be not hitting goals. It could be just general chaos because lack of procedures. Whatever the case may be, conflict comes in a variety of ways. So don't think of it so much as a conflict or a problem, but as a difference of an opinion or a disagreement or an issue to work on to improve the organization. And if you've not had conflict, then maybe you should. We tend to always like to have consensus and unanimous votes and whatnot, but does that mean that we're all just drinking the same Kool-Aid and we're not really having good discussions about how we want to move the organization forward? Conflict is also like fire. Think of it as a fire. You know, it's essential to life, and we use it every day to keep warm, especially this time of year, to cook, to cleanse or purify. We even use it to smelt products, metal into products like jewelry. And so fire is very useful for us and is involved in our daily lives, whether we realize it or not. But it can also get out of control, like a wildfire. And that's very destructive. And that's what we want to try to avoid. And as I mentioned before, there are many, many different causes of conflict. And so conflict does not equal bad. Conflict does not equal a weak leader. Conflict does not equal poor performance. Conflict is what arises from a myriad of things. It could be a difference in values, even just stress. Exercising passion over mindfulness, or ego, where the need to be right. I want to be heard, I need to be right, and I want you to look at it my way and that's it, which I guess kind of feeds into poor communication as well. A lot of times it's just a difference in how you see things, or it could be poor boundaries. Maybe someone's offsides in their roles, like we talked about with the division of responsibilities, where the CEOs look at the implementing and the how and the whom and the timeline, whereas the board looks at the big macro view of what do we want to do, what should our goals be, and the high level function of the organization. And so I put this quote in here because, one, I really like it, and that you need productive conflict for rebirth and renewal. If you think about, even in nature, there really is no rebirth or renewal or birth in the first place without difficulty, without some sort of conflict or challenge or difficulty. And it's working through the challenge that makes it so rewarding. And so in an ever-renewing society, what matures is a system or framework within which continuous innovation, renewal, and rebirth can occur. And so instead of shying away from conflict, I'm encouraging you to encounter, or when you encounter conflict, embrace it. See it for what it is as far as the potential to improve things. Keep it in perspective. You know, it's okay, like I said, it's okay to not have consensus. It's okay for everyone to not be happy all the time. The key is for people to be mindful of putting what's best for the organization ahead of what's best for their personal agendas or their own feelings. You want to keep it in perspective also because you don't want to overreact. You don't want to cause more drama. You don't want to fuel the fire. So be careful about side conversations or adding your opinions, kind of like the gossiping that we were talking about earlier, that just exacerbates the problem or the issue. And so you also want to collectively own the problem. You know, really, a person can't have a conflict with themselves, with just a party of one. It takes more than one person. And so collectively, all of you that are involved in the conflict, all that are appropriate to be involved, own it and work through it. One of the first ways you work through it is to seek to understand all viewpoints. Try to really communicate in a way that you can understand where each other is coming from, to also try to get to the root cause of how did this happen in the first place, or what, you know, how did we end up here, and what can we do to prevent ending up here again in the future. Part of that also is being open to alternative solutions, because some of the time the conflict may occur because one person or a group of people are very closed-minded and they're not willing to look at alternative solutions. So you need to be open-minded. And one way to help you be open-minded is, as you seek to understand all the viewpoints, also keep asking yourself, what's best for the organization? Not my own opinion, not my own reputation, not my ulterior agenda that I may have for being involved with this organization, but what's best for the long-term sustainability and growth and strength of the organization. And then you may want to fix it yourself. Even though we do help boards in this manner, and even though we provide a lot of consulting and coaching and training, I'm going to go ahead and say it's okay to fix it yourself if you're able to own the problem and work through it. Because again, working through the challenge can really help strengthen the organization and strengthen all of your relationships. If it is something that it feels like, you know what, the emotions get too high, we've tried to work on it ourselves and we're just not coming to a resolution, then absolutely seek outside help, definitely. And we at Grow and Lead, we're here to help you, and we're more than willing to help you through any conflicts that you may have in order for your organization to move forward. Because the more that you stay and live within conflict, the less energy and focus you have to move the organization forward, and that is not what we want. And so you want to leverage the conflict, you know, use it as a time to refocus on the organization's mission and vision, and to refocus on the stakeholders that are really relying on the organization and the services you provide, or that are helping to fund the organization. And use it as a way to improve communications, because you're also increasing your understanding of different viewpoints. And then, if appropriate, I really encourage you, debrief and document. Like, okay, when this happens and we say X, Y, Z, this is really what we mean. And so this is what is the result of that. That's not always appropriate for conflict, but it's like keeping that, document the internal knowledge, institutional knowledge, so that you don't make the same mistakes over and over. And so, I better hurry. So key characteristics, just to kind of wrap things up, of positive board and CEO relationships. Again, you're focused on what's the greater good for the organization, focused on the mission, focused on your purpose. You're willing to be honest and vulnerable, have open communication. You're willing to compromise, set aside your ego, and be willing to look at other viewpoints. You adhere to your roles. You know, no offsides. Board stays on their side, CEO stays on their side as far as who does what in helping to manage the organization and move it forward. It's okay to disagree. You can agree to disagree. You are involved together jointly in planning, especially strategic longer-term planning. You have a strong network with with each other and also outside that you're able to serve as ambassadors for. You have the mutual support that you know that your board meeting is a safe space where you can really give it your all as a volunteer and a decision maker, and that you have the support of your peers and your CEO. And you're trustworthy, and you know that your peers are trustworthy as well. Those are the sources I use. That's more of a resource guide for you. I will say this top one, Doing Good Better, How to Be an Effective Board Member of a Nonprofit Organization. That's a book, and it's, I don't know, maybe 150 pages. It's a light read. It's a really good book. So if you're looking for more information, that may be one you want to check out. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. If we don't get them to them tonight, then I will follow up, either Victoria or I will follow up with email and make sure and answer your questions. We'll be sending out an evaluation. Please complete the evaluation. We read every one. And if you have ideas for future training, or if there's ways that we can help you in fulfilling your mission work, please give us a call. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
All right, and I'm looking at the questions box, and the only question I've seen so far is, will there be a playback of this? And the answer is yes. I did record it, and we'll be posting it on YouTube probably tomorrow, later morning or early afternoon. So I will send an email that will have that evaluation that Amy talked about earlier, as well as a link to the recording and the PDF of the slides. So you'll get all of that information sometime tomorrow. Besides that, I see no questions, so thank you all for joining us this evening, and look for the email in your inbox tomorrow afternoon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.